Why use a lawyer to create an estate plan? That is a question that we get a lot here at the McKenzie Law Firm. Obviously, we do estate planning, we do estate administration, we do some small business counsel. We get this question all the time from potential clients or people who are thinking about doing their estate plan. And so, thought I'd make a video today providing my answer. Obviously, I've got a vested interest in this, and so you can take this with a grain of salt, but hopefully this gives you some things to think about. I think, as most people are aware, there are just a lot of options out there for creating supposedly estate plans, at least pieces of estate plans. I'll get to that in a minute. But we got Dave Ramsey selling certain things. Of course, there's Susie Orman's out there selling packages. You've got LegalZoom, all kinds of options, and all these options kind of promise speed and nice price. You can see that LegalZoom one in the middle says 15 minutes, $89. That sounds pretty good. So as you can imagine, working with a lawyer takes a lot longer than 15 minutes. It's going to cost a lot more than $89. Why is this not good enough? We get a lot of people say, well, maybe this plan will be good enough. So first issue that, I think most people miss is they don't actually know like what an estate plan is. I've got a couple videos. I think I've made the same video a couple times actually, trying to address the issue that I see a lot, which is people equating a will with an estate plan. And a will is part of an estate plan. And so, yes, it is there. It is definitely something everyone should have a will who is an adult, especially people who have someone relying on them. You absolutely need a will. But saying that, I've gone out there, I've gone on this website, I've gotten the will, and now I have my estate plan done is kind of like saying, well, I really need to have my physical done. I haven't been to the doctor in a while, so I've taken my own pulse, and so now I've done my own physical. Well, if you go to the doctor, your doctor is going to take your pulse for sure. That is an important part of a physical, but it's certainly not the only part. And so, will in many circumstances actually doesn't end up doing anything. So you can have a beautiful will with all kinds of ideas in it that just sits on the shelf, doing nothing if you've passed away because you haven't coordinated it with your other planning. So what other planning is there? So, you may have also heard you need a trust. Not necessarily. There are certainly circumstances where clients come into us and I tell them, yes, your plan will need a trust in it somewhere. The most common situation is where you have minor kids, right? Because you can't really leave money directly to minor kids. If that happens, an adult needs to manage it for them. And if a court needs to set that up, that is a real nightmare, big ordeal. And then the biggest drawback to that is that, the kids get those assets when they turn 21 without any strings attached in Colorado. So, you really want to control that. But there's other situations too, even with adult kids, where having some trust planning might make sense. Some people want to avoid probate. A trust can potentially do that. But lots of reasons beyond that. And I've certainly got videos out there about what trust can do and what they don't do. Powers of attorney. This is frequently an afterthought for a lot of my clients if they've thought about it at all. But estate planning is really about having, authorizing someone to do stuff for you if you can't do it yourself. And that might be because you've passed away. Certainly if you've passed away, you need someone else to do things for you. But throughout our lifetimes, most of us run into many circumstances where we need someone out there to go sign a form, get some records, authorize a transaction, do all kinds of stuff. So I've had this come up a number of times in my own life with my own wife, where I've had to get power of attorney from her to do things. So, and it wasn't because she was even in a health crisis. She just wasn't, around or in the area. So, it might be because you're out of the country traveling. So, a number of circumstances can come up, but of course more pressing than that too, where you have situations where people need help because they're having some sort of health crisis. So that's an important part of estate planning. But then getting out to, what about asset titling? What about how this is a decision you make even before you get to the lawyer, and will continue to make even if you work with a lawyer or do something online or whatever else. It's like, how do you own your assets? Are you and your spouse both on the house? Usually when we have married couples, couples, that's the situation, but not always. And sometimes they forget. It's like, oh yeah, we had to put one of us on the house because one of us had better credit than the other, and we were getting a mortgage or something like that. Or someone had a lawsuit risk, and so they transfer the house to someone else. They forget whether they undid it. So, but yeah, deciding. A lot of married couples keep separate bank accounts, and we're taking several widows through probate processes because they weren't on accounts that their husbands had. And actually, it turns out vice versa in some circumstances too. So asset titling, big deal. And if you do one of the online quickie 15-minute $90 wills, that part's not going to be. They're not going to talk to you about that. And it's like I say, it might totally circumvent your will. You might have your assets titled in a way that totally renders your will a moot document when you pass away. So that might be exactly what you want, but I always tell people we want to proceed deliberately. And then designated beneficiary instructions. We do these all the time too. Certainly when if you have a job, if you're lucky enough to have a job that has a 401k or a group life insurance plan or something like that, when you get that job, they'll be asking you, who are the designated beneficiaries on these. But if you set up IRAs or buy your own life insurance, or whatever else, same thing. You can put designated beneficiaries on a lot of things. You can put POD instructions, that's payable on death, on a bank account or something like that. So these are very common. Again, this is in front of what your will says. And so if you're doing again, it's another way for your will to be circumvented. So you can do this will online, but it doesn't really actually cover anything that you thought it covered because your designated beneficiaries do that instead. And again, might be exactly what you want. You just want to be very deliberate about that and get some advice on that. And those quick websites are not going to do that. And then the other reason to potentially work with a lawyer is just because they have experience usually administering plans, like going through probate or administering a trust. And, isn't that critical? You can write whatever you want in your plan. Right? You can, I can write, I leave $1 million to this person and the Statue of Liberty to this person or whatever else. And, no one's there to tell me like, hey, how is this actually going to happen? Right? So actually seeing what happens when the rubber meets the road on these plans is critical. And what that can open up for you is just options you don't know you have. Like if you're going through this, 15-minute template on a website, as you can imagine, for those kinds of wills to cover anybody who might come to that website and pay the $90, it's got to be very generic and very vague. And they're not going to tell you about nuances that are available to you that might be very useful to you, maybe even critical that you have in there. So again, they might not tell you about trust for kids or whatever else. So and then we always get questions as we're putting together plans like, oh, can I do something that can I have my trustee manage the money until this age and then give them kids money under these circumstances, or can I have these two people in the same position or whatever else? Those kinds of questions we get all the time. And so it's kind of helpful to have someone who knows about options and can bring them to your attention. Google can only answer questions you ask it. Right? So it's not really out there. I mean, yes, as you type in, it's suggesting where you want to go, but it's not going to tell you like, hey, I know you typed in that you're looking for a will, but the circumstance you need actually would benefit from having a trust involved. So no. And then we run into a lot of situations where common, the key word in this sense is common, right? Common family dynamic challenges where people kind of think, well, we're very simple because our situation is not unusual. And it doesn't, you don't have to have an unusual situation to have a challenging situation like in a probate process. A very common situation is like a step family relationship, right? Where we got people who have come into a marriage and they've brought kids from previous relationships, right? So they got a blended family. And we all know lots of people who are in that situation, and that that there's nothing unusual about that these days. But it actually does it very commonly creates very challenging situations within a probate process because under state law, your stepkids really are not considered kids. Your biological kids are not really your heirs. And so a lot of people want to treat their stepkids as heirs, or they want to make sure, if they're the first person to pass away in the marriage, that their own kids are being taken care of. So these are kind of difficult situations, and you really need someone who can advise you on that kind of thing. And then another, again, common shows up in this next one too, the word common. Complicated rules around commonly held assets. And what I have most in mind here is like retirement assets that are tax deferred, especially, so 401ks and IRAs. You can leave a lot of assets to your family, and right now the estate tax, the threshold for actually having an estate tax issue is so high that, as I make in this video at least, that very few families have that problem. But there are rules, that's because a lot of your assets have been paid for with taxed money, and so they don't, the IRS doesn't necessarily, that there's no tax implications to that kind of, to receiving like a bank account, for example, or proceeds from the sale of a house, with a couple of exceptions, right? There can be capital gains basis issues and some stuff like that, but for the most part, those are relatively straightforward. With IRAs, that money has not been taxed yet, right? So the IRS and Congress has created some pretty complicated rules around, if you inherit an IRA, when does that money have to be removed from that IRA? How quickly? What are the tax consequences of that? Who can do it? Who do these rules apply to? And so for most people, their 401ks, their IRAs are either their first or second most valuable asset, depending on how much equity they have in their house. So this is a big part of people's estate plans, and they might have all kinds of ideas about how they want to, restrict access to funds to people or whatever else. And it's like, well, the IRS is not going to let you do what you want to do, and so you really need someone who knows that. And this is just an area with a lot. It's complicated even for lawyers, frankly. So it's a challenging one. And then just thinking through, how will this actually get carried out, right? So a big area of emphasis for us is just picking the right people that carry out the plan. Again, like if you're putting together an estate plan and you've never actually done a probate process, it's like, it's just like anything else. Like, you're trying to plan for something you've never done before. Compare that to planning for something you do all the time. Well, the lawyer's in the position where, we kind of do this all the time. We're seeing how probates go. We're seeing what kind of qualities make a good personal representative. We see what happens when, two personal representatives are appointed at the same time and they got to work together. We're seeing what happens when people disinherit someone and how that goes and what leads to litigation, like all those kinds of things. And these are present in, most people's plans. There are things to think through, and everyone thinks that they're simple, again, because they don't see anything in their life that is really that unusual. But just because it's not unusual doesn't mean it's simple in probate. So just knowing where the landmines are when you're creating a plan can be very helpful, because sometimes people have some pretty, fully fleshed out ideas. They've really thought through it all. It's like, we've seen that tried before, and here's what complications that's going to create. And again, you're not going to get any of that if you just do the 15-minute will idea. And then again, common ideas that lead to trouble. There's that word common again, where we'll see things like, for me, the common thread in probate processes that become difficult is low liquidity, right? If there's not a lot of cash available. So sometimes we have people who are blessed with lots of very valuable assets. Their bottom line is really very, very high. But a lot of those assets are tied up in things like real estate or, closely held businesses or something like that. And it's like, well, that could be actually kind of challenging. And again, we kind of need to think through the nuances of how that's going to go. Another very common situation is like where a couple has kids, one of those kids is living with them, and there can be all kinds of reasons for that, but creates a lot of awkwardness if one kid is living with the parents and kind of thinks that the house is theirs, and really it's not theirs, right? It was the parents' house, and they've got siblings outside that house, and they're disagreeing about how quickly should that person who was living there need to get out? Is it like, should they get that house? How should they be? A lot of the people who are living with parents are there because they're taking care of parents in their elder years, and so they feel like they need to be compensated for the time that they'd spent doing that very difficult work. And the other people are like, well, there's nothing in the will that says that. So we see that a lot. And so again, identifying those issues that come up where we see a lot of problems that people wouldn't necessarily realize if they hadn't been through a probate process before. So these are just a few reasons. I hope maybe this will get you thinking about why maybe spending a little bit more time than 15 minutes and a little bit more money than $90 on doing something that will really have implications for a lot of people is worth your investment. And if we can be helpful, that'd be great. Again, we're in Colorado, so we help people in Colorado. We're in the Denver area, 303-578-2745. Again, we're the McKenzie firm. You can see our website there, themckenziefirm.com, and we'd be happy to have the conversation with you. And I hope this video is helpful. Thank you.